Hi, everybody. I'm starting to hey, I see a lot of familiar faces. I love it. Okay, I think we are pretty ready to go. I'm Erica Wall, and I am the director of the Berkshire Cultural Resource Center here at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. I want to take an opportunity to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us. We are really excited to be resuming our sessions with Genevieve Gaignard, who is our inaugural artist in residence, and in square number, I don't know, number 8. There she is in her car. Thank you. That's how we like it. And we are really excited about today's session. We have an opportunity to have an amazing discussion working and deconstructing around and with Genevieve's work, specifically her installations. And so a lot of you know when I do these, I don't spend a lot of time on introductions because we try and put as much information online about those who are going to join us so we can spend this hour and a half really talking with Genevieve about her work. But I would guess that we are probably more excited than you are about tonight's talk because it just kind of came about so amazing and serendipitously that we felt that it just had to happen. So we have Dr. Taryn Jordan here with us, and Taryn actually joined us during Genevieve's sessions and shared with us the work that she was doing and using Genevieve's work in her research. And when she told us, we were all amazed and just knew that we had to continue the conversation. So she is going to talk about several installations with Genevieve tonight, but I want to share with you a little bit about her and what she'll talk about. So Dr. Jordan is going to discuss the force of Black domesticity in Genevieve's installations. And I wanted to share with you, all of this is online, but specifically what she asserts before we go into the conversation. Dr. Jordan asserts that Black women's domestic work counters the violence of Black living by producing pleasure through everyday experiences that are overlooked or considered inessential to histories of Black rebellion. There are several installations that they're going to look at tonight. But I wanted to share with you too that Dr. Jordan is also a CFD postdoctoral fellow in women's studies at Colgate University this year. She received her PhD in women's gender and sexuality studies from Emory in 2020 and was the Mellon ACLS dissertation completion fellow in 2019 to 2020. She's also working on a book project, which she expanded on and told us about, and we were all blown away, called A Peculiar Sense, A Black Feminist Genealogy of Soul, which traces a genealogy of the descent, emergence, and use of soul shown in Black women's domesticity. So I think it's going to be pretty badass tonight. I'm really excited. We have two amazing people within the art world who are going to share their thoughts and discussions with us. I'm going to defer to Genevieve and Dr. Jordan after this. I just wanted to, I guess there's a little bit of framework that Taryn shared with us. She's going to focus on the importance of domestic spaces as vital locations for inquiry, considering our present marked by COVID-19 and the reemergence of Black Lives Matter protests. And she will expand on some definitions with that. So what we're talking about, if you came in late, is this. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. It's where all things come from that are all wonderful within the Black community, Black girl magic. So let's get started. Can we unmute Taryn and Genevieve? Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you both.
Great. Thank you so much, y'all, for coming. I'm super overwhelmed by all the folks that have showed up, some who I know and love and care for, so thank y'all. And really thank you to Erica Wall and Veronica Bersadio for all of their tireless work on making this event happen. Obviously, the conditions of our world leave a bitter taste in my mouth, like too much death, too much grief, too much exhaustion. And there still remains sweetness found in new collaborations. As Erica's already pointed out, the relationship between COVID-19 and the reemergence of Black folks dying in the streets at the hands of police produced the conditions for us to meet. But what we're here for, and I'm thankful to be in conversation with, is Genevieve today, because it's precisely her work, her installation work, her sculptural work, her photography, that really is that kind of occasions our meeting. And last, I just want to say really thank you to the folks who are protesting in the streets. I feel like I spent a long time doing all sorts of work, both political and academic. And so this is an opportunity to kind of merge those two things together. And I really hope that all of us on this call will take seriously the sacrifices people in the streets have made in our honor. But okay, so all the thanks and love and shout outs are done. I'm gonna sound a little professory for a second and then really kind of just jump into dialogue with Genevieve, if that's okay with y'all. And so I've written some comments because God forbid if I'm not precise, right? So briefly, I want to give a bit of framing of Genevieve in my discussion today. As Erica mentioned, I'm a Black feminist theorist. My present work focuses on studying the ways Black folks produce and use soul. And quickly, soul is a really strange word in that it kind of signifies Blackness, but when I use it, I want to think about it as a space of respite or rest in an anti-Black world. So through some historical work, I've really kind of focused my ways around domesticity and the ways in which Black folks use domesticity to produce soul as a space of love and pleasure, shown in sort of cooking techniques, homemaking, and then aesthetic decoration of the home. These life-giving techniques are historically and presently vital to Black resistance, large and small. And I know this might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but I don't make these claims sort of lightly. Obviously, feminist scholarship over the last 50 years and obviously feminist politics have really written against the home as a site of women's oppression. However, Black women specifically, but Black folks more generally, have used, the slaves' quarters, the Black side of town, and spaces of protest produced through Black women's labor as like a vital aspect of our living. And just a couple of citations to give for those in the room who enjoy the ways in which some of this sort of work is coming from. I'm really drawing closely on Angela Davis's work, written in 1972, Reflections on a Black Woman's Role in a Community of Slaves. Davis was in prison at the time of writing this, and she really just kind of clearly states that she says that the Black women's both double bind as both domestic worker, kind of at home in the spaces of the enslaved quarters, sort of cooking and working and caring for other folks, on top of the kind of complications of her as a sexual object in the master's eye, made the slaves' quarters a space of hidden and sort of in plain sight. And so Davis writes this in 1972, and then you have a different historian, Stephanie Camp, who follows in 2004, where she kind of gives us a little bit more historical specificity to say that the slaves' quarters specifically, alongside ecological locations of swamps and forest thickets, were spaces of deep relation where folks were, exchange, gossip, heard on the plantation about the various ways in which folks were being caught. They would give food, they would give shelter, and also provide folks with medical help if within their frame. And obviously there's two different ways in which folks did this through the notions of, the truant and the fugitive. And the truant was much more women who would kind of go hide in the forest and then come back to the slaves' quarters and hide in the evening. And then obviously the story of fugitives and runaways are folks who kind of go off to the north and escape slavery that way. So in both these instances, both these historical writings between Davis and Camp's work kind of really centers the space of Black domesticity, the home, the enslaved quarters, as a vital, vital aspect of the work that sort of undermines this Black rebellion. And often it's not looked at as an important place because similarly to larger discussions of homemaking, this is a kind of labor that's not necessarily paid for, so it's not valued in the same sort of way. But it's actually these spaces that become the impetus for the kind of protests that we're seeing presently. And just really briefly, I think I've been super moved by some of the folks in the streets serving food to people. You saw the same thing happen at Ferguson. And even more importantly, during the civil rights movement, you had women opening up their homes and cooking for various traveling SNCC members, since other spaces weren't safe for them. But really, I say all this to say is to really kind of hone in on the importance of Genevieve's work and what she's doing in her artwork, at least in terms of my own interests. And really what I find most compelling about what Genevieve is doing is located in the kind of historicity that she performs through her arrangement of the items in her installations. It takes the viewer, the one engaging with her work, to another time, another place, a different site of rest and repair. Even more, her work showcases the importance of these spaces for all of us to view and engage. And what I mean is that it's kind of produces a sort of living history in these spaces. And so I just really want for us today to kind of dig into the different spaces. Genevieve and I are going to chat a little bit, and I promise that's it for all my lecture-y style talking. I really want us to just have fun. In all the conversations I've had with Erin, Genevieve, Veronica, and Erica have been really kind of lovely and improvisational. And so I want to carry that over. But I want to defer to Genevieve really quickly, because one of the things that wasn't really answered for me in your previous statements or your previous presentations is what sort of sparked your interest in these homemaking spaces and domesticity. And maybe a two-part question is, how did it kind of move from photography to these larger installations?
Yeah, thank you for all of that. And I'll just second in thanking everyone for joining us. And it's awesome to see that Taryn's community is here. So thank you all for coming. But to get to your question, I think I always I was always drawn to like observing what people surround themselves in their homes. Like they're clues for me in a way.
Yeah.
And so I think I started to like, I'm trying to think back, to see if I wasn't really aware of that. That's how I was thinking about things, but, just what sorts of things do people surround themselves with to make their space feel like home? Like what things comfort them?
Right.
For, in the house I grew up in, more was more. And other people, it's like less is more, And I think I was constantly comparing that to my surroundings that I grew up in,
Yeah.
But I don't think I was really, locked into it as like even a form of art making per se. And I think that I didn't really create installations with this idea or this, like, I'm set out to do this thing, like with the label of installation art.
Yeah.
It was just, my thesis show was like, this has to look like this. And I wasn't like, oh, I have to create an environment for the work to live in. It was just like, I need wood paneling. I need this. I need that,
Yeah. So it seems like maybe, you would have these photographs and you needed to kind of create space for the photograph. And that's kind of the like interest, the vibe that kind of emerged from it.
Well, it's like the photographs, often people will think that I'm kind of creating the spaces for the photographs, but those are more found. And I'm tweaking myself to kind of fit the space.
Okay.
Where the installations are more like pulled from my imagination.
Yeah.
To further tell the story, I guess.
That's beautiful. I think one of the things that I most loved and resonated about the presentations you've given before through MCLA is finding out the kind of jobs you had before you got into artwork, which resonates for me because my path into academia was very like, I worked at the Gap, I had a run at the Cracker Barrel. So like which is like, for those of people who know me, think it's really hilarious that I worked there. And it was a wild time in my life. But I found it really interesting that in your previous jobs, if I remember correctly, you've done like care work. So you like worked in people's homes for people who were like, elder care work. You've done, obviously I got really excited when I heard you went to culinary school and you decorated cakes and things. So all of this feels like these are various tasks that are very much associated with this thing, the Black domestic or domesticity in general. And it's really compelling to hear that this is more of an organic kind of outcropping for you. More so.
For sure. I also, just to pull another job in there that was related to cooking, I worked at a private school in the kitchen there, And if one of the students did something wrong, their punishment was to come and work in the kitchen. And I remember addressing one of them because they were, they're mostly cool and you're like having conversations with them. And I said, isn't it interesting that your punishment is my job?
Ooh. No, I mean, that's really great. I love that you say that because there's the kind of class element. I don't want to get too outside of like the box, and I want us to jump into one of the installations, but I think that's one of my favorite aspects of your work. And I think it kind of gets to this thing that I'm after in my own work around domesticity, is that, this child's punishment is the work I get paid to do, right? Like there's kind of an interesting contradiction there that I think your work kind of explores in a really beautiful way. And it's, what I love so much about it is when I'm an interloper, I feel like, in the art world. And so thank you all so much for my formal invitation, it feels like. But, in my years of kind of viewing art, I always felt like really distanced from it because it didn't speak to me necessarily and the kind of experiences I come from. My dad was a chef in the military. My mom was a homemaker most of her life. And then also taught children at school as like a teacher's assistant and all that. And she was also a lunch lady at a certain point also. And so there's something about the spaces that you produce that feels so wildly familiar to me. And so I think there's a whole bunch of resonates. What your work does is really kind of resonates, amplifies those kinds of histories that pull on parts of Black history that aren't necessarily the most valorized or considered the most important. We tend to want to exceptionalize the kind of large figures that tend to be masculine and, famous.
Yeah.
But maybe we should just jump into your installations so that I can just chit chat with you all day.
Yeah,
We want a little show.
The slide. I feel like I spent way too much time on this, but.
Oh no! Oh, that's beautiful.
So we already know this part, but.
Yes, it's been all over the Instagram.
But I just wanted to give you, since we didn't get to talk about the order of everything, but I based it off of your notes. I just kind of gave you this slide prior to the work that's coming.
Oh,
just
yeah.
Give you a heads up. Cool.
Yes. So this piece, remember this house. That's the correct title, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I really love this piece, especially because it's part of two different sides. Can we show the other side?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit to work with here. So.
Oh, beautiful. Right. So this is
we'll leave it here.
Perfect. Yeah. No, what I love, I've never seen this piece in person. And in fact, after kind of chatting with you the last few weeks through the kind of space that MCLA has offered us, I got super stoked about this because I think what you're doing artistically is really showing the kind of historical ways in which the color line has been produced in modernity, which I know is a big fancy claim to make, but to sort of ground it a little bit more. Du Bois in 1903 tells us the color line is the problem of the 20th century. And I pick up on that work to actually kind of do some of that more historical work and expand it beyond just the 20th century and think about the ways in which the color line repeats over time from as early as 1480 all the way to our present. And I think that what I love most about this piece is that while each side looks almost similar, right? Two chairs, decorations on the wall. One has a TV, the other side has a radio, it looks like. They couldn't be more similar, but any more different. And it kind of really gives me this beautiful kind of connection to sort of Zora Neale Hurston and this piece she has that she wrote called The Characterizations of Negro Expression. And this goes back to something earlier you said. She says that Black folks sort of mimic things, but the difference between the mimicry is drama. And when you said you grew up in your household, it was a household of more is more. And it really kind of like draw upon me, like kind of hit me a little to see how that more is showing up in both of these pieces. Because while it may not necessarily be more stuff on the more colorful and bright side, there's something about it through that bright pink and blue chair and that plant that's sort of crawling out at you that is really stunning.
Yeah, I often think about the installations since the home I grew up in was more of a kind of hoarder-esque vibe. Sorry, Mom.
We won't tell.
But like I've spoken about the installations, kind of me organizing the clutter.
Mm-hmm.
The space I grew up in, I felt like my mom has a really good eye for things, but there was never this celebration of the things. They just seemed piled
Yeah.
and strewn about. So it's therapeutic in that way, I think, as well.
Yeah. How did this piece, like, is this, I don't remember, I don't have on me the dates. I think I kind of went in like a weird reverse order
Yeah.
because I'm always confusing time.
We're kind of
But
going with the most recent.
most recent all the way back
Yeah.
to the beginning.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me about like pulling this one together. You said that you wanted to kind of categorize and organize the kind of disorder, or not even disorder, because that sounds so pathological, but like the kind of differing ways that your mom would organize and decorate your home versus how you sort of produce these spaces.
Yeah. I think that's just like an overarching thought
Theme.
with
Yeah.
all of the parts of the installation creating, like, that I've created. But um this particular, this is one part of a larger show.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of moving parts. By this time I've created quite a few installations, and so I've got kind of a rhythm. I can't really explain to folks what I'm looking for,
Yeah.
like in terms of if I'm reaching out for help. But um it kind of was a discussion to have an installation, but there was something really unique about this wall that separated these two gallery spaces. And so, in a way to activate it and incorporate it, instead of it being a separative like piece, it kind of being this one thing that almost you could imagine it rotating.
Right. Right. No, it kind of gives this really kind of beautiful duality of worlds which you're playing with. And I mean, they both speak in different ways. And, I love that this one on my left, which has kind of like this kind of more gray and muted color tone, has like a ship in the middle as the highlighting thing. And then over on the other side, you have these really beautiful wooden busts, and then this kind of framing of brick, and this gorgeous star up top that gives me kind of like North Star vibes. And so there's something really interesting here in terms of how you're playing with history a little for me, because it kind of really kind of messes with light and dark, histories of colonialism and the Middle Passage, and then on the other side, kind of what it looks like to live on the other side of that light. And what I mean by light is often when we talk about the emergence of modernity and man coming into scientific knowledge, it often is characterized through metaphors of light and dark. And I think that your work is really kind of playing with those kind of dualities there, which I find super compelling. I think another question I wanted to talk to you is, one of the things you just said that kind of made my ears ring a little was that you don't even know what you're quite looking for. And can you say more, if possible,
Yeah.
about what that means? Like, so when you don't quite know how to name it, is it kind of a feeling you're looking for? Is it more, and yeah, like what comes up for you when you know it's the thing that's supposed to go in the space?
Right. I mean, I think all of the installations start with kind of having a sense of the space that I have to create in. So once that's checked off the list,
Right.
it starts with the wallpaper.
Your wallpaper is so rich. Okay.
So that really kind of sets like where I kind of go from there,
The wall,
I
you mentioned the wallpaper. Okay.
I definitely had this idea, like, this kind of stereotypical white family's home, and then a black family's home, playing up stereotypes maybe, but also like this idea of like, if you don't have a lot of black friends, if you don't have any black friends, like you kind of assume that this is like a foreign place. And like this, I just wanted to be like, no, it's actually not different, but it's cooler.
I mean, I agree. I grew up in Las Vegas, and my mother's house had like these like mirror tiles on the wall, and these like floating silk plants, and like pictures of family, and I think we had a similar fake plant, and my mom definitely has chairs that look just like that, a different pattern choice, but similarly loud, but a similar kind of wingback in our house presently. And so there's a level of like Black familiarity.
You're sitting in something that kind of looks like that now.
Yeah, I know. This is not my home. I'm at a friend's. I know. That's why I was like, I'm presently sitting in a weird space. Like I have all these nautical things behind me. Trust.
I'm like, I don't see the stripes.
I know this is not my personal aesthetic.
I'm just messing with you. It's fine.
But no, I wanted to start with this piece because I think it kind of really lays down the key to what you're up to, and what I find so compelling about your work is this kind of play of duality that you're doing in your work that, I think I shared with you when I kind of revealed myself as like a super fangirl about your work and how I use your work in research, was I got yelled at by another scholar for trying to place upon a label of Blackness onto your work. And it wasn't for this piece specifically, it was for Apartment 3401 that we're curiously not talking about, but which is my decision. Because I'm like, I don't know, I'm still thinking about it. But this woman yelled at me about this piece, and the woman was white, and I was a super junior grad student scholar, and she just told me that the room wasn't Black. And I was like, do you not see the photo of Malcolm X and Michael Jackson? And the hair, like the hair hood, right? Like that to me screams kind of Black aesthetics of domesticity that for me feel deeply familiar. And so I just really wanted to focus on this to highlight the ways in which, this kind of Zora Neale Hurston notion of mimicry that shows up, that the fundamental difference is these two rooms are both, in some ways in terms through form, copies of each other, but through effect, fundamentally different, that really give us that kind of notion of drama that I think Hurston is really after.
With that particular,
No, go ahead, you.
With that particular installation you're talking about, I wanted it to feel like a mashup of two worlds in a way. So maybe that woman was feeling connected to it.
Yeah, she was.
And she didn't want to make that connection.
Yeah.
I think the work is trying to do that to people.
Yes. Your work makes people uncomfortable, I think, in a certain aspect. That I think that this room kind of really plays with that discomfort. And I think the sort of moment we're in, as much as we've had all this like really lovely progressive history around gains of civil rights movement and, desegregation and et cetera, we're still kind of managing and fighting for similar things our ancestors have been fighting for a long time. And I think what's really important to me, to be really clear for those of us, the folks who are in the audience listening to Genevieve and I talking, I said this in a one-on-one conversation with her and other folks on the back end of the preparation for this, but I think for me, when I use the term Black, and I always get a little anxious about this because in a lot of the research I've done on your work, folks are very clear that you're working through a sort of biracial, mixed race aesthetic, but I kind of assert Blackness through my own lens of reading your work, through a kind of political and refusal to only assert Blackness as identity. But also to assert Blackness as identity, insofar as mixedness is a fundamental aspect of Black identity. And also, the fact that you're playing with these dualities, it's an aspect of Black living, having to kind of code switch, et cetera. And also kind of more theoretically and conceptually, I want to kind of give myself space to understand that we quite don't know what Blackness is, but there is something kind of strange and interesting about it, and allow myself to be open to the kind of difference that implies. So like it's not difficult to explain insofar as it's a theoretical concept, but it's just want to be clear of the audience that it's not exclusive to a kind of embodied identity, but it's also a kind of aesthetic schema that emerges out of histories of modernity. And folks can ask me more questions about that later. I don't want to get in a rabbit hole of lecturing too much about that, but that's kind of the sort of frame at which I'm emerging from. Right. Do you want to move over to Black, White, and Red all over?
Sure.
Oh, I love that cat. Oh, this room. I think in our conversation about this, you said that, if I remember correctly, this is one of the first rooms you did before you did the previous one. Correct. So had you not done this room, you couldn't have done Remember This House, which was the previous installation. And when I look at this room, all I think of is red. And I did like a quick search on like the meanings of red, and one of the ones that I found most compelling to me was sort of anger. And I realized that I rushed on from my question to you, but tell me more about the sort of use of color in this room, if you feel like talking about that, and just more about how you choose objects. I'm going to push you a little, I think, on that, if that's okay,
Yeah,
because
I'll try.
I think that there's something really cool about what you're getting at that I suspect we have some similarities around.
For sure. So I think, again, this space started with the wallpaper.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this was displayed in Chicago at Monique Maloche Gallery. I think she's joined us here today. And she also let me paint her gallery red, which is like the worst color to paint a room.
Yeah. Yes.
I guess it's just like the hardest color to paint over or whatever, but she allowed me to kind of create my vision. And back to the wallpaper, it kind of was like I was kind of looking of where this could go, and stumbled across this paper. I'm gonna go ahead and just show you a couple things because I really want to show you a detail, and I can kind of scoot back to some of these slides.
Oh, these are beautiful.
So this is a close-up of the paper, and it just kind of obviously tells a clear story. And I often, where I get my wallpapers, they will address the time period that the paper is from, and I'm kind of like, whoa, this must be from God knows when, back in the day. And it was actually a paper that was from the 1970s. And so I had this kind of feeling about, wow, people still wanted to live with this type of imagery during that time. So I'm constantly addressing from like the perspective of white folks, saying like, we've come so far.
Yeah.
To just be like, actually, and that's why I think I'm so drawn to using the vintage, the things from the past to just show exactly how much we haven't really come,
No, I mean, I this is one of the pieces that I think on the phone call, I sort of gasped when you told me the year it came from was the 1970s.
Yeah.
Insofar as this sort of slavery iconography, to like live with that walls, papers, your home or a bathroom, like the kind of connection that one wants to surround oneself your home in this kind of iconography. It's wild. And, I think as someone who sort of really spends an immense amount of time studying like Black pleasure, but also violence, I'm still like, wow, I'm still shocked by some of this. And it's super compelling how these things sort of repeat over time. So these images haven't gone away. And in fact, the person from the 70s, if they're purchasing this, didn't live during this time, right? So obviously these images and iconography is sort of a reminder, a visual history, if you will, of a certain kind of white supremacy, certainly.
And it's embraced and passed down generation to generation. And it's just like, where does it stop,
Right. That red all over the room is, I feel like I haven't really seen you use red in this way in any of your other work.
It's really not one of my colors.
Yeah, it's not the palette you're usually working with. And so, I mean, it seems like you obviously had some feelings about this paper, this wallpaper that really generated this very red room.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a direct reaction to, Republican, what I was just thinking of, like the map that they show when voting is going on, and like you can just see how red it all is, and you're just like, I think it is that fear of just like, what is this gonna translate into? And we've seen what it's translated into, but yeah.
No, I mean, I think that eagle presiding over the wallpaper, the way you have it sort of the center and top of, it's like the highest point in the image, definitely speaks to the ways in which, in the histories the histories of violence that this country has begot in its emergence. I think that there's something really compelling there. And obviously in all of the kind of looking up in meanings of red, red has all these implications around anger and blood, obviously, right? Like, I think it's obviously, like, it feels like you're painting that room red in an effort to show all the blood that's spilled, in an effort to sort of uphold this eagle and all that it stands for.
Right, and you have this one lone black teddy bear kind of sitting amongst this sea of red, you know?
Yeah, it's sweet and it's soft, but it's black, right? And it makes me think about Tamir Rice and Trayvon and all those who've died who were children, for the sake of someone's conceived notion of safety and fear.
Totally.
Ugh.
But that, like, walking into this space or even creating this space, I felt uncomfortable the entire time. And even for the collage works that were in this show, you know, I used mostly like a red backdrop. Side note, I am possibly sitting through a severe thunderstorm, so just if I have to turn my car on to put the windows up, I apologize for the beeping sounds.
No, it's okay. I mean, you know, weather, I don't know, like rains and storms, you might as well start like hailing locusts at this point in the game.
Well, it's just like it's setting the mood, like this is kind of a dark scene, so we're just like
right, but like nature and ancestors are responding in kind to this conversation about the kind of the depth at which you're playing with, and not playing to like imply a kind of reduction, but the kind of intensity that you're putting in that room.
Yeah,
I love that Marilyn Monroe photo there. It really kind of messes with you. I mean, because part of what you're up to is when we think about interiority, right? Like in these kind of domestic spaces, domesticity is considered to be the feminine space, right? And often when we talk about those who are producing, you know, forms of racist terror or racist, you know, violence, it's definitely coming at the hands of, you know, we presume like white men, right? But I think what your work also plays with in a really kind of stunning way that's sort of breathless in the worst kind of way is the ways in which, you know, feminine violence also enacts itself, and how like these notions of feminine and masculine and gender in general don't necessarily easily regulate itself to presumed notions of who is the actual producer of violence. I mean, the internet is rife with jokes about Karen, you know,
right.
And so, yeah. And we have a few comments that have come into the chat, and some private, some public. So I just want to make sure that folks know we do have a question and answer time at the end for folks to kind of engage more broadly with Genevieve's work, for certain. Those ribbons, those are wild. It's like notions of meritocracy and achievement, earning the kind of status and wealth that this room is sort of giving.
Yes. And so, sorry, I just wanted to also mention, so I flew to Detroit where my studio manager, Erin, lives. We went searching for all these things. And again, like I told the gallerist, like, yep, I'm going to do this room and it's going to be something like this, but I can't really explain it because I don't have the stuff yet and I'm finding it as I go. But I need the walls to be red. So, you know, I had no idea that I was going to, you know, find these ribbons. I wasn't looking for these ribbons. So we found these at some like warehouse thrift area. And, you know, like, so it's all pieced together. Then we also went out in Chicago as well to find some key pieces.
How many hours have y'all spent searching for, like, just maybe this room, like searching for items?
I don't even know. I don't even think it would seem like that many hours per se.
Yeah.
Because it's one of the things that somehow I just know it's going to work.
Of course. Yeah.
And I'm just like, the thing will find me, or I'll find the thing.
Yeah.
Just because even those chairs in the last one that you mentioned,
right.
I remember reaching out to one of my thrift stores or antique shops, someone I buy a lot of stuff from, and I just said, hey, I'm looking for some chairs. I really didn't give her any information. Do you know? Like I was like, let me know what you have. Hopefully they're matching. And she sent me a picture of those like in her storage unit, and she's like, I'll get these out if you want them. And I was like, they're perfect. And she never, I don't even think she saw the wallpaper, you know, and the wallpaper was hard to kind of read, but the palette, although it's kind of a wash of kind of a light gray or black, it's got all these pastel like pinks and blues and yellows in it.
Ah, okay.
So that in person you can really see that pulling from the chair and all the other objects. Sorry. So
no, don't you dare apologize. I love it. I love I think because part of what I want to like go back to is one of the questions I sent you that I was interested in that we talked about before is you said you have a hard time articulating what it is that you want. And you just said like the things kind of find you. And so it's not even easy to quantify how you find it. Things kind of show up and find you, and it always kind of works.
It's a feeling. It's a feeling because like, you know, sorry, the rain is gonna, can you hear that?
I totally hear it. It's okay. I'm all right with it. You know, water every single time, one of the most important moments in my life, there's been a rainstorm. So I'm into it. Are you safe? I just want to make sure you're okay.
I think so. I'm on 4 rubber tires. Yeah.
Okay. We'll keep going as long as you feel good.
No trees overhead. So the thing is, like, you know, working with Aaron and a few other people that kind of know my aesthetic or kind of what I'm into, you know, she could point something out to me and I just know I'm like, no.
Yeah.
So like I can't explain maybe what I want, but then when I see the thing, and I really feel for her because she's trying to help, and or I'll have like a long discussion about like, should I get these ribbons? Like, is this the vibe? Like, I don't know. I didn't really envision this, but it's got the red, but I kind of like that it's incorporating in the other pastel colors that kind of feel like my aesthetic. So it sounds funny, but like sometimes it's just like really serendipitous, like the things that cross into my past.
Yeah. No, I think you said quickly it's a feeling, right? Earlier, you just know or you don't know, or sometimes it's not quite clear, but you go with it anyway.
Yeah, and we actually purchased a totally different couch in Detroit. And then when I got to Chicago and I started to kind of see how it looked more together, and I went to this one shop and there was just like that white couch like glowing in the window, and I was just like, I haven't ever paid that much for like a couch before.
I mean, that kind of mid-century couch in that condition.
Myself,
yeah.
Like I'm like, I don't need to buy stuff for myself like that, but it was like, I was like, this is gonna make it be the thing. So, you know, it was like Aaron's just like, okay, don't worry, I'll find, you know, a shelter to donate the other couch to. We'll get this couch, you know, like there's all these other things happening and moving in order to make these things come together. I gave my mom the task of finding the red books.
Nice.
I don't know what they don't have to be about anything specific. I just visualized this like wall of red books. And the one black book is actually like a Hitler's biography.
Whoa.
So there's a lot of like weird little things that like, I don't even know if I asked her for that, but somehow that was in the box, you know, like,
yeah,
I wasn't looking for that, but it became, I don't know. There's a better like detail.
No, it's great. I think when I've written about your work, I talked about it through this like formulation that I called thought as arrangement. And part of what I'm interested in this notion of thought as arrangement is it's a way to show that in the sort of Jim Crow era, post-Reconstruction time, so immediately following slavery and the demise of Reconstruction, through the histories of lack of education and so on, you know, Black folks were able to sort of express themselves through home design. And one of the things you're talking about as feeling, for me in that kind of theoretical construct, feeling is vital to what is up in these forms of arrangement. And so I love the story of you kind of like both being the central core of arranging this room, but also being open to the things that emerge and find you. And then you kind of are the sort of, you know, I'm doing this hand motion, the conductor of this kind of room, this sort of like origination of the space.
Yeah. And also like some things have like a flip side meaning,
of course,
in a way, you know, so it's like in a different context, this might not read as creepy or demented or disturbing or whatever, but when you see like this just the color being so saturated in everything, but still kind of putting in the pops of black and white, and there's still like a little bit of humor that tries to be in there, you know.
God, those dogs. Their faces are so funny. They look so sweet and precious, right? Like I follow 1,000 dogs on Instagram, and like I feel like I've seen photos of dogs that look just like this. And so there's this kind of like, you're surrounded by this intensity of color and anger and like blood and Republican Party and the politics of it, right? And all these Americana sort of signifiers floating around. And then you get these kind of like campy, kooky, funny things that you want to laugh at, but you're also a little disturbed by the laughing.
Totally.
You know, like I'm interested in that sort of slippage. I mean, at this point I can go on and on, but it's beautiful. That couch is really nice. And that fluffy teddy bear is super cute.
This installation is still available for any collectors out there. Sorry.
Yes, please hype your work. It's stunning. Please buy Genevieve's work. Keep her in business.
But this, so this was like this, again, my mom has this way of throwing in things in the box that I'm like, I never told you to send any of that, but I think she threw this needlepoint situation and just laying it on there and this kind of detail with that next to the bear and the wallpaper, like that's really like the moment, you know?
Yeah.
And then when you pull away, it's all red and you're just like, I don't know.
Ooh. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. That wallpaper. I love how wallpaper really generates for you a lot of your thought when it comes to sort of pulling these spaces together. I
have this weird like reaction to things. Like my brain is kind of programmed to see things in the, like, to see an alternative motive behind the thing. Like you mentioned that ship in the like white room.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh yeah, that's gonna symbolize the slave ship. Like, yes. I don't know, like, and I don't have to tell anyone that necessarily, but I don't think I wasn't drawn to like that thing for anything other than it having that weight of what it did to the other side of that installation. Right.
I don't know. I feel like you like create these installations and you give us these like hieroglyphs, you know, and you gotta like think through them a little, and get a sense of like what you're up to. I
don't even have enough time to really live with them either, because I'm building them on site.
Of course.
And so even making the slide presentation, I was just like, whoa, I don't even remember like finding that, like there was like, is it the mallet, like the judge's mallet was on the shelf. Like, I was just like, I don't know. I just probably was drawn to it as like the colors or something. But then I was like, wait, it's so weighted. And sometimes I'm not fully aware of all of the parts because there are so many.
I mean, more dogs. I think one of the things that I found really, I said that like your work pays homage to sort of forms of Black domesticity. And I think that it's like a living history. I think the way in which you talk about your experience of like kind of collaborating and putting these rooms together, obviously between like Aaron and your mom and other sources, it feels very kismet to my experiences in the archive. You know, like I feel like this woman from Iowa, this Black cookbook writer found me. Like I was at Harvard and I got, someone told me through word of mouth that Ella Fitzgerald had a cookbook that she wrote. And I was like, okay, cool. I didn't know that. And long story short of it, I show up, I got funding for it and everything. And Ella Fitzgerald didn't write this cookbook. It was a draft of a cookbook written by a Black woman in middle of nowhere, Iowa, and she had this really amazing philosophical narrative that I ended up using for a lot of my work and plan to use later for the book project. And I completely just kind of showed up and just looked at the thing and I was like, I'm crying and I'm having all these feelings. And I was supposed to spend like 3 weeks there. And I was just like, okay, I got what I need. Like this is the thing. I know it's the thing, and it just showed up in front of me. I didn't go looking for it. Someone heard about my work and it through a series of emails and conversations, the thing showed up in my lap, and so I ended up going to Iowa, and while I'm there, her family heard about me and wanted to call. Like, it was a whole thing. Like, I've never met this woman, you know. She's a stunning, amazing woman. Shout out to the, you know, unknown ancestor, Miss Aldine Davis. But yeah, like there's ways in which for me too, that I think I find in your work so compelling that I assumed by just reading it and not knowing you or being able to talk to you, that it felt like there was a kind of interesting way that you arranged rooms that I assumed had everything to do with feeling, and not just feeling in this kind of shallow sense, but feeling through this kind of deep depth. And you're kind of reproducing through a high artistic form the kind of forms of feeling that I think Zora Neale Hurston was talking about, with this idea of mimicry that has all this drama. Because if red is a damned dramatic color, right? And it has all these significance and meanings for you. If we want to move on to counterfeit culture, if you have that next.
I just wanted to point out that little figure behind the couch.
I didn't even see that. Oh, this is my fave character. This figure in your work is my fave. Oh. So I will lead here, just because this is, when I wrote about 3104, I had a mentor of mine, James Ford, sent me images of your work, and he was like, look, I think this person might be really useful to like what you're up to around domesticity. It was the very early stages of what I was writing. And I like went to Harvard for this research trip, and I snuck away to New York to like specifically come see your work, because I'd never seen it in person. And as someone who's like really interested in aesthetics and sense and feeling, it felt ridiculous that I hadn't experienced your work in person. And so I went on like the last day it was open to the public. And I remember like tagging you on Instagram on the story, and you were so sweet. You like liked it. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Who knew I'd actually end up chatting with you a couple of years later. But what I loved most about this one specifically, and you can't tell from the photos, there's a song playing. So when you come around the corner of the gallery, you're like kind of like overwhelmed. So you come up these stairs and see this amazing photo of Genevieve on a beach with like this like beach t-shirt on, and this like $sign towel with like a visor and like blonde blowout with like big curls. And then you come around the corner and you see this like stunning pink bathroom scene. And at the end of the gallery is this room, this scene right here. And there's a song playing, and there's this gorgeous black fur coat on the side. I spent maybe 2 hours in that space, and it was phenomenal. Oh yes, that one. And I think for me, like this space for me really resonates what I was saying earlier, more conceptually about Blackness. What I meant by that is, you know, obviously Black is an identity, but I think what this room is doing is really playing with all the kind of complexity of what we mean when we say Black or identify as such. And I think what you're pointing to is like also the political history of the Black Panthers, right? Like, I feel like I certainly didn't grow up with a Panther table like that, but I remember going to like kind of like those mass furniture stores as a child, you know, and I saw things like this in the store. I mean, I grew up in glitzy, tacky Las Vegas, y'all. Like this sort of aesthetic was like 100% a part of my aesthetic world. And it's just, yeah, we had rattan chairs in my house also. So tell me a little bit about pulling this space together and what was coming for you here.
Yeah, so I didn't want to like make it super obvious that it was about a specific character from the photographs, but I wanted there to be at least a little bit of a, like, if you wanted to place one of the characters in this, you could. So you know, this being the character, there's the fur coat. We read her however we read her.
Yeah.
There's clues in here that you might not specifically connect to her until you really start to like look at the details.
Mm-hmm.
But my first idea was pulled from something I'd done in the past, like this kind of extreme cat lady.
Yeah, I know.
You know, yeah, like
cats in your work. There's so
all
many of them.
Things are cats, but like the twist was that it was more of focused on like the Black Panther. So there are a few other Black cats in there, but it's really supposed to kind of have that vibe. And again, you know, I can reference my mom again. It's kind of like, how many of the things do you need? But if organized and, you know, displayed in a particular way, it like celebrates each object, each thing has a meaning and importance, then it's just more loaded, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I had for you, you know, if you've noticed, I have these kind of like metaphysical, weird, sort of surrealistic questions, but like like your work has obviously been, you know, folks have written about your work as being sort of inspired by, you know, John Waters movies, camp, drag, you know, Ebony Magazine, etc. But like, who are the people who show in the room with you? I think you talked about your mom and obviously Erin, but is there anybody, like, you have this like cat lady kind of trope that you play with a little throughout your work. I love that image of like the cigarette and the look. My grandmother was a cigarette smoker, and she had a sort of similar kind of high class. She loved fur. I'm sorry, PETA folks, you know, like this image, iconography to me that felt really deeply familiar. And so, like, who shows up in the room with you, real or imagined, when you kind of put these sort of spaces together?
I mean, I guess I have to just like believe that I have, like, without it sounding hokey, like, just like,
I'm into hokey. Give me hokey.
Spirit guides, because honestly, sometimes I'm just like, I have no idea. Like we mentioned, you know, like I didn't grow up seeing this stuff per se. I often will say like I'm kind of an old soul.
Yeah.
And so there's like this unknown understanding of these things with no real, you know, in this lifetime, like where I got that from.
Yeah.
So I don't really know who to say like who's showing up with me here, but I definitely feel their presence. It might be a little bit in like some of these found photographs that I use in the spaces. Almost like you find that one piece, and for me, like I don't often, like I have to go on a search to find, you know, old photographs of Black folks, and
yeah,
often there's and I don't know if you got to really look at that center image, and I'm sorry that there's not a closer up detail of this, but
I did. It's yeah, they're
very, you know, light-skinned Black women. And but I kind of was like, man, I wonder where this lived and what is their story and all of that. So it's like also celebrating, creating a space that makes sense for them to kind of continue.
Yeah. I think one of the things you said that you're also pointing to right now is when I first encountered 3104 is I asked if this was a tomb. And when I think of tomb, I often think of like Egyptian style tombs. As a child, I was really obsessed with Egyptian iconography and watched all those like Discovery Channel shows about like, you know, Tutankhamun's tomb, and obviously Las Vegas opened up the Luxor, so I was all in that biz with my auntie. But I think one of the ways you described this work in our conversation offline was that you considered it an altar. And it felt very much like a kind of, I felt like a sort of a reverence for these figures in the room. And I don't know who these women are. I don't know where they come from, but it felt very different. So when I was in New York, I saw this piece, and then I went over to, I go to the Met at the moment. I went to, I think the Met, and they had this like Black photography, like found photo installation up, and it was like a room full of all these photos from like, I think the 30s and 40s. So like pre-World War II, post-World War II. And it was just these photos and photos and photos. And they're kind of just like on these glass and on the wall. And there wasn't any ceremony involved with them. And some of them, the way they were put, you could see the inscriptions on the back. And it was all these like love letters. And while I found the installation moving, some part of it felt kind of awkward, because I was just like, these photos are people. These are people's family. Like, and at some point I even started like looking to see if I recognized anyone. And it felt very different than what you've done here, because you've kind of honored whatever kind of energy or spirit that's coming and speaking to you through these objects. And, I found it really compelling that you kind of don't spend, hours and hours and hours of like scouring every thrift store in every vicinity of every city that you've put these together, which might be a part of it, or even that your mom finds things and sort of sends them to you. There's something there that maybe these objects are finding you on purpose.
Yeah.
That, you know,
in this particular setting, there was a lot of scouring for Black Panthers, but so not all of them are as easy as the others. You know, this is the installation that was across from that one.
That flamingo wallpaper is boss.
So like that, this installation, like all of the objects that you're kind of seeing, Aaron and I went out to like a hair supply store, and just that ended up being like more about what this was for, like this idea of consumerism and tying in the towel, like the money towels, to the photograph, and also this, again, like celebrating these things that white folks feel are so foreign, to then celebrate them, like draw you in so that you're, familiarizing yourself with things that shouldn't be threatening. Just because you don't use it doesn't mean it's not, okay.
I mean, part of what I'm getting at, this notion of like Black domesticity and what you're up to, and not to even talk about the space of the gallery. I mean, when I got there, I was so stressed. I was worried I was in the wrong place. And it was kind of hard to get into the gallery itself. Yeah. And there's this like weird solo elevator, and there was a security guard, and I was sweaty from the subway. And I was just like, okay, all right. It's okay for you to be a little bit of a chubby 5'10" Black woman with big shoulders. And you're gonna walk in there and you're just gonna act like you know what you're doing. And like, I kind of just entered into an office area that I had to be like, I'm just here to see this thing. And it felt like I had to get through so many different kinds of obstacles. But once I was in that space, I felt I was the only one. I was by myself, which was like kind of a gift. And I felt like this is where I think about portals and your work being kind of out of time. It just felt like I was in a different kind of space that felt deeply familiar. And I think that, what you're getting at. So obviously we're speaking at different levels, critiques of capitalism and consumer culture, but also this kind of notion of making, visible the infamiliarity of that Blackness and Black histories and Black products and Black domesticity begets, I think is actually, you're doing a vital project here, because that day I worked really hard to try and see your stuff. And I was like, whoa, okay. I took a deep breath, right? When I walked in that room, which that moment of deep breath is exactly what I'm after in this question of like the force of domesticity. I think we tend to sort of reduce the importance of those spaces of respite and places or respite, where we can kind of relax and laugh and eat and enjoy and take care of our hair and our beauty and our faces and sit down and listen to some music, and even the smell. But I realize it's 6:00, 6:03, and folks might want to have questions. We still haven't talked about Smell the Roses and Grassroots, but maybe we can just flip through as folks have questions. I want other people to join in the conversation. I don't want to cut Q&A short.
Sure. I just want to give you a sense of like walking into that space, showing the exteriors. So it's like you're walking through the neighborhood or something.
It's huge.
This show was kind of the work that was created after my niece had passed away. And so I'm kind of in the middle of processing that, but knowing that the work is stronger, or the message gets through more when like it's personal, but it's broader at the same time. Yeah. So this idea of having the two spaces was like, have this more personal space, this bedroom and bathroom, and then on the left-hand side, and a reference to my New Orleans heritage in reference to Hurricane Katrina and the loss that happened there. Yeah. For so many, but more of a communal space, the living room, the kitchen.
Well, the kitchen. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a shotgun house, right? Like that's what obviously.
I was trying,
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm here for you. I got you.
And I was talking to Aaron, and the piece that's above the window on this particular shot, like some of these things have to be recycled or reused, you know, like that couch is in my living room. My roommate is like sitting on that couch, and then I have that wooden decorative piece that's above the window has been since attached to a collage piece that lives in a new home now, you know, like, so it's like they have a journey themselves.
I was going to ask you what happens to the pieces. So obviously that couch is in a living room somewhere. Do you store them?
Yeah.
Do you try and sell them, you know, collectively?
Yeah, it's from like the artist perspective of like trying to like make your living off of these things. It's one of those questions that gets asked, like, oh, is there going to be an installation? And it's like, yeah, I guess, but where is it going to live? You know, like there's no thought about like, where does this get stored? That's a very like expensive part of like, you know, keeping all of this stuff. So I have a little bit of like a recycling of some of the objects that happens. Sometimes I just like the thing, so like I don't mind having that old lady couch in my house.
It's a great couch.
Diedrich might, but it also pulls out into a bed, so you know it's very versatile. Our friends and family have rested their heads on that.
I kind of love that you actually live with these objects. Like it's like they're in like an installation, and the kind of like, I don't know what's the word for it, like the valuing of these as like art objects in a museum that give it all this sort of significance and meaning, but you also put it in your living room. I mean, that kind of gives that kind of play back and forth to sort of what I'm interested in, is sort of the everydayness of these objects, and why I think your work is so vital and important to sort of histories of like Black women's domestic work that are pivotal to political work that we see, because these objects of living are our whole worlds, right? Like we sit on a couch and have a friend hold us when we're crying. I mean, I think, yeah. So like kitchens, you know, like I love cooking, and I think in an alternative life, I would have become a chef, but my dad was like, don't do it. It's a lot of hard work. And I still went and catered anyway, you know, so like, but he was very proud about it. But yeah, I think that, you know, and there's all these like feminist themes of kitchens, you know, Kitchen Table Press for all these Black feminists have published books. You know, so there's something what you're up to. I know that installations are costly and probably don't produce the same results, you know, capitalistically as other forms of your work, but I hope you keep going, and people give her opportunities and funding to do it. But because, you know, money matters, and as a researcher, I get it, like getting money to do your work.
I don't want to sound like I'm only doing it for that. Honestly, like it does, it's one of those things that like it kind of brings all of the work together. It's like it just you know, I think of it as like people that have different ways of learning. A lot of us do. And so it's like, if you don't get it from the collage, then maybe you'll get it from the photograph, or you'll get it from the installation.
Yeah.
But then some people need the whole thing, and it's just like, you know, I don't know.
No, it's great.
I love doing it. I just need a warehouse that has a very small rent. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, you live in LA. Like I think this is actually really important. It gets back to like what you're putting on display, right? Like this is where like class, race, and gender all kind of like intersect, to use those terms, where like, you know, you're highlighting like kind of working class and like regular folk living spaces for your artwork, but in reality, like you yourself have to sort of negotiate the kind of very real material notions of having to store the stuff and pay for it, and what that looks like for you to also be keeping these kind of archives of these objects, you know, and caring for them in ways that maybe they weren't cared for before them finding you. And so I totally understand you're not, you know, the money thing is not the only aspect, but, you know, under late capitalism, we all have to kind of take those questions into mind as we move forward and create our art and our work.
Yeah. And then also, it's a little sad that it has to like then kind of turn into something else, but
yeah,
it's sorry, Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that I think Genevieve would probably agree, like that's what we've talked about in some of our discussions about just what it means to be an artist. And, you know, there are so many different facets to this that are not so, you know, there's not the transparency in the art world that helps us to understand what it actually takes to sustain a practice. and a career and all these different things. And it's incredible how you know, Taryn has tied this into what we're talking about and what your installations do and mean, and we're able to have a dialogue about that too. I think just in light of time, I just wanted to chime in, and we could definitely go back to the thread that you had just started, but I wanted to at least give a couple of folks who had some questions an opportunity.
Sure.
A couple of people had asked questions specifically, Genevieve, about some of the items that you chose.
Mm-hmm.
In the first installation that you looked at, Daphne, and you can chime in, Daphne, if you want to, she was asking if those were bowling trophies on the 2 pedestals.
Yes, good eye.
So
They are.
okay, Daphne. There, do we want to unmute Daphne? Hold on. There we go.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I was just eagle-eyeing and just thinking it was such a privileged thing to be able to have this hobby, but then I was like, I bet other Black people bowled too. So it was just interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It just started this conversation with me and myself in my head.
Mm-hmm. Class, race, and gender.
Yeah. That's all.
Daphne, good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
And then I think it was someone else had a question about collage, the collage work that you do, and she wanted you to talk a little bit more about what draws you to do collage.
Mm-hmm. I'll just pick one.
Sorry, I don't know. Ask that question.
Well, I feel I'll just start talking if we find the person, then that's great.
Okay.
The collages are, I feel like I've said this before, maybe not in this talk, but it's like if you cut out a section of one of the installations, it's like, because it's still using the same materials in a way, you know. It starts with the wallpaper. It's a response to that. Most of the objects I'm using are, you know, flat cut out images, but I'm still kind of arranging it in that kind of way that I think the installations kind of come together, you know. But I think there's a way that I can use the imagery that I find in the magazines to really point at specific things, because I'm like pulling it right from the things that we're all seeing on a regularly, and just flipping them on their heads in a way.
Right. It was Mary Catherine. Mary Catherine, did we get your question answered? We'll just assume that we did. Okay, Mary Catherine, shoot me something in the chat if we didn't get that. And then Deborah Frank asked about porcelain dolls. The porcelain dolls that you've used, Genevieve, were those porcelain dolls from your childhood? That's what she asked.
Nothing on this one is from, let me get back to, not that one, sorry. So there's a few things. The only thing from my childhood is the Cabbage Patch on the bed with the yellow sweatshirt and the cat ear headband. Everything else is, you know, found, like this space, you know, was a direct like conversation, I think, in a way, to my niece, is like almost like all the things I didn't really get to talk to her about or explain in terms of like her being part of like Blackness or being Black, and just clearly like putting things, like thinking about the audience that would go into the museum at the same time, you know, like it wasn't just about my thing. I'm keeping it open. But the Cabbage Patch specifically, I was like, can I show a spectrum of Blackness with the Cabbage Patch dolls? maybe I'm like that one on the first at the end.
But you're still on the spectrum.
I'm still there. One of them tried to kick me off the bed, but I got back on. I'm joking.
Genevieve, actually,
Yeah.
it wasn't in this photo. It was in another one, and they were white porcelain dolls, and they were on a bookshelf, sort of to the side.
Oh yeah, that I was not sure. So that one was me just like collecting like super.
It's not that photo. Keep going. Yeah.
Are you talking about that shelf under?
Keep going. It was
in
another
the red
one.
room?
Yes, I believe so.
Mm.
No.
It was on the bottom of a bookshelf, I think.
These?
Correct.
Right here?
It was a long bookshelf that was almost like ceiling to floor on the right side of the screen.
Oh, was it a clock?
No, this one. Is that a clock? Yes.
It's a clock, a grandfather clock with shelves. I don't know.
Yes, the dolls there.
Yeah, just creepy dolls that, you know, grandmas collect. And I don't know, like I remember even just with Erin, I'm like, dude, look at this thing. She's like, that's creepy. And I'm like, perfect. You know?
Well,
yeah, I don't know what the question is exactly. Sorry.
oh, well, prior to this, where you did like the caged birds, you had talked about taking the heads off some of the other Black images that you had because you couldn't play with dolls that resembled you or your family. So I was wondering if this was sort of the same imagery in the white dolls.
I don't remember saying that. I was saying that blackness is a spectrum. I had a black doll growing up, but I was also showing that there was a whiter looking Cabbage Patch.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just old dolls that are white. I don't know.
Okay.
But there isn't like a reference to me popping anyone's head off or anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have, I just had to share this comment because Veronica said that she had the Panther table in her house growing up.
So
That's
dope.
pretty impressive, Veronica.
The Panther table is pretty magical.
I actually said this installation did get acquired, so this was the one that I was like, oh, I could use a few things from that one. But definitely didn't.
I'm sorry. I digress, but I had to put that in there because you know I love that. Okay, Juliana has a question. From the discussion, it seems like a lot of the specific choices and objects for the installations are based on institution and kismet. I'm just wondering when you start thinking of the installation before you start looking for what speaks to you, how much have you already decided? Ooh, that's a lot. Can we unmute Juliana just to make sure I got her question? But it sounds like, do you know what you're envisioning before you do it?
Kind of.
Anna?
She should be unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was wondering. It's just
Okay.
a lot of it seems so intuition based and by chance how the discussion has been occurring and that things find you. So I'm just wondering, before you start to go out and even look, how much have you already decided on, and like what have you decided to base your installation off of, I guess, as like the starting points?
I think it starts with me. Obviously, I've talked about the wallpaper. So that gives me a sense of maybe a color palette where things are going and things like that. And then just breaking it down of just like the basics of what a specific space has to have in it to read as that, like the toilet, the sink, the mirror. And then all of the other things, I think, start to become, you know, that kind of wandering and looking and knowing what it looks like in my head, but not always super clear. Like that toilet came out of a friend's like apartment rental, and they literally were like, do you need a toilet and a sink? And I'm just like, I don't know how to say it, but I was just like, oh, do you guys still want to get rid of that toilet and sink? You know, so that's really kind of random, I think, but and just like the color just they didn't see the wallpaper. I didn't know what I was gonna get. You know, if it was blue, I probably still would have used it because it might have still done the thing. But yeah, and then it becomes, you know, I'm looking at some of the objects to kind of think of like the journey, you know, and there kind of is this Etsy scroll that I do. So I'm looking for objects of a certain time period, or things that flash to my mind, like what the old Aquanet hairspray bottles look like, and finding that on eBay. And, you know, those fish above the mirror are often in like pastel colors, and then seeing them in black and gold, like that kind of just pop of a color that might otherwise not be expected. But it's like, it's my like visual language of being like, don't forget about blackness. Blackness is part of this. And I'm using it instead of words, I'm using it in colors, and hopefully you're going there with me, but it's not always, you know, it's kind of based on the person. That makes sense.
Right. We've got 2 more questions. Someone asked, Giovanna. Giovanna says, going back to remember this house, the piece with the brick intending, is the piece with the brick intending to be a mirror reflecting a window that looks out at a brick wall?
It just happens that the gallery is in this kind of industrial type building, so you are seeing the brick wall that is reflecting whoever they hired to photograph the space. That's what they chose to put in the reflection. I guess it's better than the guy that was photographing it. But yeah, it was interesting hearing Taryn talk about it, and then yeah, like it just kind of reads in an interesting way. But it's a mirror, so like where my thinking was like, I'm standing in this white space, and there's really like there's some kind of mirror like lantern things up high, there's a blackened television screen, but there's really no place that I can see myself when I stand in front of this. Right. When I go onto the other side, I'm welcomed, I see myself, I'm part of this story. It was kind of my thinking behind that.
Thank you for unmuting me. The reason I'm like, oh.
Hey Jojo, good to see you.
Hi Taryn. The reason why I asked was because I've been thinking a lot about Black people in rental spaces, since Black people don't own property largely, and that has historically been a problem. And so I actually just moved, and I moved to Chicago, and my window looks out at a brick wall. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do I design my space really around this piece I could consider an artwork, instead of seeing it as a limitation. And so it's been making me think a lot about the women in my family who have rented, who have had to figure out how to design a space based on the restrictions they have. And that's something that I study a lot. And that some people, as soon as they pass on, you know, someone else has to be in that apartment right then. So I'm thinking about all of these things as I'm looking at your spaces, and how part of why these design choices are so important is because they end up being so ephemeral, and like they come with Black women as they live, and unfortunately as they pass. So all this stuff is floating in my head because of this brick reflection that was accident.
I mean, yeah, it was there in the space, but yeah, it does set up an interesting, path to kind of figure how that even works into the context of the bigger picture, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of Chicago, Monique wants to know what's up next for you.
Just getting through this storm. Okay. You know, I'm in a residency program right now, hence this video. And so I'm creating a new body of work, focus on collage. There will be an installation. Didn't tell Aaron that yet. Hi, Aaron. Sorry. Yeah, so that's kind of what's next. That will be featured at, Gallery 51. And, you know, the gallery in LA will also kind of have a chance to share the work as well.
And we have another question. Of course we have time, Cecilia. What's What's your question?
Hi.
Hi.
Something interesting. I'm Cecilia. One thing that was interesting from an observation that Taryn made is what sparked my question. And there was a comment that Taryn made alluding to the installations being like an altar space. And so that also made me think about when in hearing the other person talk about moving into a new space. When I move into a space, usually there's some saging or something to cleanse the space. And both with an altar, I do that as well. So I was just curious if there was any saging or any cleansing. I know that technically in galleries, you're not probably supposed to be saging spaces down. I might have gotten in trouble once in the past for using sage in a gallery space. But I was just curious if there was any saging or other rituals that you do in preparation for the installation or as a closure of the installation. And similarly, Taryn, I read your work and the same lines as Genevieve in different ways. So I was curious also if there's any rituals that you do in preparation, either for your writing or when you go into the archives. Because that was another comment that was said throughout that I was like, oh, so yeah.
Everyone, this is my longtime partner of 11 years. Thank you, C, for the question.
I mean, I wasn't gonna say.
It's a good one though. Real talk. It's really, really good. So I love to hear.
I also love the setup of like the three folks on the. Like, I noticed that like right away. Sorry, do you want to go first, Taryn?
No, you.
Okay. Well, I can't piggyback off anything then. No.
Okay, is that better? I can go first.
No.
Okay.
Probably yours is probably. I was like, I'm not saging anything. I have found items that I'm like, I've picked up and put down, like in spaces, and just been like, this isn't for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think there is this sense of like touching everything. Like I have. Although I'm getting help with it, you know, when we're installing it, it's just like this, I don't know, like a connection to the things through that. Is kind of the only thing I can really think of. Because some of the objects I'm really drawn to, like I want this for the space, or I want this for my own space, and it somehow becomes part of an installation. So I don't know if it's really would fall under that kind of idea of a ritual, but just having a connection to the thing.
Yeah. I think for me, similarly, I think, writing is really hard for me, and archive work is really intense. I think when you're archives, and this is not to, I want to be like gentle, but also direct. Archives are similar to gallery spaces. Sometimes they're not particularly welcoming, and they have histories that follow them in their production. You know, walking into an all-white room, it can feel really intense. And similarly, walking into an archive that may not all be aesthetically white, but actually kind of produces a form of whiteness can be intense. And so, you know this, but sometimes I carry little mementos. My dad, who was, I think, the first artist in my life, I grew up with his paintings in my house. I wear his bracelet. And also I phone a friend if it feels really intense, and I think similarly to Genevieve, I looking through these papers and things, like when I found that cookbook I talked about earlier of Miss Aldine's, I like literally started crying in the archives. I was that weird person in the corner, like, I just knew, I knew, and I had to touch it. And I think in my work, I've written about that kind of affective relationship as vibration. So there's something kind of like that you just know within yourself, this is right, this is wrong, and so I think Genevieve and I definitely kind of resound a little bit together around sort of finding these objects. And for me, the objects have to kind of resonate either through a memory or a relationship or feeling, and that's kind of the experience I've had and reading Genevieve's work. We just met each other through this very Zoom aspect, but I feel like we're kind of kindred spirits insofar as I think we have similar relationships to objects. You know, my work, in fact, when Jojo asked that question, Giovanna, sorry, my bad for calling you Jojo in like a public aspect, Giovanna. But when Giovanna asked that question about the brick wall, I actually thought it was purposeful, and it made me think about the refusal of the self and like wanting to think about objects as the center, not one's individual materiality. And so I think I love that there's something there happening. We can all kind of read it differently. And so, yeah, no, I think just to say that for me, the objects in the archives and the things I'm writing about, I have to have a relationship to, they have to kind of speak to me. And I talk about it as speaking in my work.
I think that, you know, I think that this discussion, we could probably continue for another hour and a half. And I don't know about y'all, but I felt like it was even better than I had imagined. Unfortunately, we're at our hour and a half time. I wanted to especially thank Dr. Jordan and Genevieve, as always, for sharing their discussion with us and letting us be flies on the wall, and also letting us engage and participate, because I think that is why we're all here. And I want to thank all of you again for joining us. I can't reiterate much. Again, I think that Genevieve, Aaron, Veronica, and I, Taryn, Daphne, Michonne, Jeff, oh my gosh, all these people that we have just started to like, we feel like we know you because we see you once a week, 5 to 6:30, and we solve the world's problems to come back again to have to do it again. So on that note, I again thank both of you, and I invite everybody to come back again next Wednesday at 5 to 6:30 when we are going to talk again with Genevieve and have Alexandra Terry, who's here, gave us a wave, curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art at Santa Barbara, who is going to do a 2-part series with us and talk about, with great transparency and in-depth discussion, which is what we like to do here, about the show that they had opened shortly before we all went into quarantine. And Bloom Projects, Genevieve Gaignard, Outside Looking In. And so, again, we're really looking forward to that with Alexandra and Genevieve, and I hope Taryn comes back and everybody joins us again, because you know, on a serious note, it has been such a pleasure to have this community to talk to right now. And, you know, Taryn talks about crying. We cry out all the time, and it feels good. And we know that we can depend on at least an hour and a half each week to come and discuss things that are difficult. And I wanted to mention this, but we didn't have time. And I hope we talk about it in later conversations. I think we'll have opportunity. But Genevieve had said several times, and I think Taryn too, that what we're talking about is difficult. What she does is not always comfortable. And I think that as artists and as those of us who are participants in the art community, it is often uncomfortable, and uncomfortable for some more than others. But at this time, these are the opportunities that we have to talk about that discomfort. So I really hope that all of you come back and take an opportunity to discuss that and flesh this out, because it feels good. So I wish everybody well. I hope that we all stay safe. And I look forward to seeing all of you again. Genevieve, hit us with some tunes. Come on, girl.
Oh, I'm like, I didn't get to see anyone. I'm like, oh my God, Rick's here. Oh my God, Rick's here. Michelle, Dwight.
Okay, roll call. Roll call. It's
Hi,
okay.
guys. Jeff. Hilarious. I'm sorry. I don't even know if I have any found.
There are so many people that came to visit and see you today. You too, Taryn. It's amazing.
I know. I was going to say, thanks to Taryn, we got like a whole new group of folks.
I know. This is what community building is all about. So as we go out, I'm just going to start saying people: Taryn, Alan, Alexandra, Angelica, Brenda, Candy, Cecilia, Deborah, Emily, Aaron, Gianna, Jeff, Joe.
Here. Oh my gosh. Hi,
Giovanna, Kentora, Michelle, Nicole, Stephanie, Yvette. Thank you all so much for coming and joining us.
This might your faces.
I want to see your faces. Really neat. Yeah. Girl, I keep talking over you. I'm sorry. I'm done.
I want to see everybody. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Take care. Thank you.
Oh, there you
Thank
are.
you,
Oh my
Taryn.
God.
Thanks,
Somebody
everybody.
got this.
Hopefully,
Thank you.
we'll see you next week. Be well, be safe.